Good morning, students. Hope all of you are fine. Beta, this lecture is also for revision of chapter 6, and name of this chapter is the three orders. In previous lecture we discussed about the three orders. Those were in the social hierarchy of Western Europe, and those three orders were noble, clergy, and the peasants and workers, right? So these three orders we have discussed in detail, and today's topic is the factors affecting social and economic relation. So which factor that have a great impact on social and economic relation? Like we have seen that members of first two orders, they saw the social system as stable and unchanging, but there were several processes which were just transforming the system, which were changing the system, and even these changes were gradual and almost imperceptible, the changes in agriculture technology and land use, then in turn was shaped by and had an effect on the social and economic ties between lords and vassals. So the relation was also changing between them. So now we will discuss all these processes one by one. The first one is the environment. So from the 5th to 10th century, most of the Europe was covered with vast forests. Thus, the land, if the land was covered with the forest, it means the cultivable land or the land available for agriculture was limited. So the peasants, they were dissatisfied with their conditions, and they could flee from oppression and take refuge in the forest. Means whosoever were oppressed by these two classes, they can flee in the forest. So even Europe was undergoing an intensely cold climate spell in this period, and this led to severe and prolonged winters. And so that is why just winters were very long. That is why the growing season was very short. So it reduced the yield or production from agriculture. But from the 11th century, Europe entered a warm phase. Means the environment changed. Average temperature increased, which had a positive effect on agriculture. Peasants now had a longer growing season, and the soil now less subject to frost, and it could be plowed easily. So environmental historians have noted that there was a significant reseeding of the forest line in many parts of Europe. This made expansion of the area under cultivation possible. So this way also the environment was the main factor that affect the social and economic relation. Now the next point about the land use. Initially, agriculture technology was very primitive. They were using the old methods of agriculture. The only mechanical aid available to the peasant was the wooden plow drawn by a team of oxen. में जो बैल होते हैं वो खेत को प्लो करते थे. This plow could at best scratch the surface of the earth and was unable to fully draw out the natural productivity of the soil. Means this was also not that good कि जिससे natural fertility peasants were not getting that from the earth. So because they were using this primitive method, this wooden plow, so agriculture was therefore very labor intensive. So much labor was required for that, and fields had to be dug by hand, often once in 4 years, and the enormous manual labor was required for this. So an ineffective method of crop rotation was in use. The land was divided in half. One field was planted in autumn with winter wheat, while the other field was left fallow. So this way crop rotation they were doing. Rye was planted on this piece of fallow land the next year, while the other half was put to fallow. It means in that fallowing time they were not cultivating that land. Actually it is not the correct crop rotation. What is crop rotation hota hai beta, when we are just growing different crops in rotation, and as you know that different crops they need different type of nutrient from the soil, right? So that is why we need different things. With this system the soil slowly deteriorated, and famines were not uncommon. Means famines were very common at that time. There was acute shortage of food. Chronic malnutrition alternated with devastating famines, and life was difficult for the poor during this time. Despite these hardships, the lords were anxious to maximize their incomes since it was not possible to increase output from the land. Whether these peasants, they were having very hard time, but the lords, they just want to maximize their income. So the peasants were forced to bring under cultivation all the land in the manorial estate and spend more time doing this than they were legally bound to do. Means according to law, whatever time they are to devote on this plowing, now they were giving more than that time. The peasant did not bow quietly to this operation. Since they could not protest openly, they resorted to passive resistance because they were not allowed for the open resistance. So they spent more time cultivating their own field and kept much of the product of that labor for themselves. They also avoided performing unpaid extra services. They came into conflict with the lords over pasture and forest lands and saw these lands as resources to be used by the whole community. Now, according to these peasants, the forest land and the pasture land, that should be the common land for them. While the lords, they treated these as their private property. This way, their social relations were changing. Now, the next point related to this is the new agriculture technology. By the 11th century, there is evidence of several technological changes. Like instead of the basic wooden plows, cultivators began using heavy iron tipped plows and mold boards. So now these new techniques were used. These plows could dig much deeper and the mold boards turn the topsoil properly. With this, the nutrients from the soil were better utilized. And the method of harnessing animals to the plow improved. Instead of the neck harness, the shoulder harness came into use. This enabled animals to exert greater power. Horses were now better shod with iron horseshoes which prevented foot decay. So even there was increased use of wind and water energy for agriculture. More water powered and wind powered mills were set up all over Europe for purpose like milling corn and pressing grapes for wine press. There were also changes in land use. The most revolutionary one was the switch from a 2-field to a 3-field system now. In this, peasant could use a field 2 years out of 3 if they planted it with one crop in autumn and a different crop in spring a year and a half later. That meant that farmers could break their holdings into 3 fields. They could plant one with wheat or rye in autumn for human consumption. The second could be used to spring to raise peas, beans and lentils for human use, and oats and barley for the horses. So this way now they changed their method. The third field lay fallow. Each year they rotated the use among the 3 fields. So this way now they were using this strategy. With these improvements, there was an almost immediate increase in the amount of food produced from each unit of land, and food availability was doubled. So now the greater use of plants like peas and beans meant more vegetable proteins in the diet of average European and a better source of fodder for their animals. So this way they were getting more nutrient also. For cultivators, it meant better opportunities. They could now produce more food from less land. The average size of a peasant farm shrank from 100 acres to 20 to 30 acres by the 13th century. Holdings which were smaller could be more efficiently cultivated and reduce the amount of labor needed. This gave the peasants time for other activities also. These technological changes cost a lot of money. Peasants didn't have enough money to set up water mills and windmills. So the initiative that was taken by the lords. But peasants were able to take the initiative in many things, such as extended arable land. that can be cultivated. That land is known as the arable land. They also switched to the three-field rotation of crops and set up small forges and smithies in the villages where iron-tipped plows and horseshoes were made and repaired cheaply. It means now for their subsistence, they were just utilizing their own things. The personal bonds that had been basis of feudalism were weakening because economic transactions were becoming more and more money based. Lords found it convenient to ask for rent in cash, not services. And cultivators were selling their crops for money instead of barter system. Why would then take such goods to be sold in the towns? The increasing use of money began to influence prices, which became higher in times of poor harvest. So this way, agriculture prices doubled between 1270s and 1320s. So this way, all these factors it has had a great impact over the social and economic relation uh, among these three orders. Now, in the meantime, a fourth order also came into existence, and this order was the new towns and townspeople. The expansion in agriculture was accompanied by growth in three related areas, that was the population, trade, and towns. Like now, population roughly 42 million in 1000. Europe's population stood at 62 million around 1200 and 73 million in 1300. So better food meant a longer lifespan. By the 13th century, an average European could expect to live 10 years longer. Women and girls had shorter lifespan compared to men because the later ate better food. जो men होते थे, they were getting more nutrient food. The towns of the Roman Empire had become deserted and ruined. But from the 11th century, as agriculture increased and became able to sustain higher levels of population, towns began to grow again. So, this way, this led to the growth of periodic fairs and small marketing centers also. These marketing centers, these gradually developed town-like features like that area that have a town square, a church, roads where merchant built shops and homes. So there was an office also who governed the town. In other places, towns grew around large castles, bishop estates, or large churches. This way now means this was the just a step towards the urbanization. In towns, instead of services, people paid a tax to the lords who owned the land and on which the town stood. Towns offered the prospect of paid work and freedom from the lord's control for young people from peasant families. Town air makes free was a popular saying. Many serfs who were the serfs beta, which just rendered services to other. Those person they were known as serfs. Many serfs craving to be free ran away and hid in towns. And if a serf could stay for 1 year and 1 day without his lord discovering him, he would become a free man. And even many people in town, they were free peasants or escaped serfs who provided unskilled labor. Shopkeepers and merchants were numerous, and even there was a need of specialized skills also, like bankers and lawyers. So, all these people, they could be said to have formed a fourth order. And the basis of economic organization was the guild. Each craft or industry was organized into a guild, an association which controlled the quality of the product, its price and its sale. It means if the question is asked that what do you mean by guild? So guild was an association which controlled the quality, price and the sale of any product. The guild hall was a feature of every town. It was a building for ceremonial functions and where the heads of all the guilds met formally. लाइक आपने आजकल देखा होगा आपकी एसोसिएशंस होती हैं डिफरेंट सो दिस वाज द एसोसिएशन टू प्रोटेक्ट द इंडस्ट्रीज. Guards patrolled the town walls and musicians were called to play at feasts and in civic procession. And even by the 11th century, new trade routes with West Asia were developing. English traders came to sell tin, and even commerce and crafts began to grow in France. Craftsmen, they used to travel from manor to manor, and they found it easier to settle in one place where goods could be produced and traded for food. So, as the number of towns grew and trade continued to expand, town merchants became rich and powerful, and they rivaled the power of the nobility. So, beta, this was the topic about the factors affecting social and economic relation and how the fourth order it came into existence, right? So, hope all of you have understood the topic. Thank you and have a nice day.